Where have all the terrorists gone? Now, you might think that that's an odd question, and I'm certainly not saying that terrorists have disappeared from the real world, but if you were watching the media coverage of our recent 16th anniversary of 9/11, you would certainly wonder where all the terrorists have gone from there. You would have thought that the planes went into the World Trade Center on their own, or that it was some kind of mistaken guidance system or something. The pilots just made a mistake, and they ended up in the World Trade Center and in the Pentagon and in a field in Pennsylvania. Not that there were terrorists purposely driving the planes after having planned this attack for ages. Why is this important? Why am I so upset about this? What do I want you to do about it? Well, you'll understand when I explain what I did during this past week leading up to 9/11, the anniversary. I went to New York to have the launch of my new book, Lions and Tigers and Terrorists, Oh My, How to Protect Your Child in a Time of Terror, at the New York City Fire Museum, because that museum has an exhibit, a memorial, to the firefighters who lost their lives in 9/11. And as part of my launch, they allowed the people who were attending the launch to have a private viewing of this 9/11 exhibit before it was open to the public. That was a wonderful day, and it was really exciting, especially to be able to talk to the first little boy who I showed my book to, whose mother bought him the book. He was 4 years old, and it was that's why I wrote this book, to see, to teach these children. Okay. Then, the next days, I spent a day each in the 3 museums that are dedicated to 9/11. First, I went to the Tribute Museum. That is a museum that concentrates on the families who lost loved ones or who were impacted in one way or another by 9/11. And I took a tour, and it was led by 2 people who were impacted, a man who was a crane operator during the recovery efforts, and a woman who lost her husband, a firefighter, in 9/11. And so it makes 9/11 come alive in a very personal kind of way, actually hearing these stories. Also at the museum itself, there was a docent who was an EMT, and he was very involved in the recovery efforts, and he's suffering from cancer because of spending time at Ground Zero. And in fact, not only we hear about the victims, the numbers of people who died during the actual attack, but there are also victims who are the forgotten victims, in a sense. We need to recognize that there are people continuing to die as a result of 9/11. These are the people who were involved in the recovery efforts, the firefighters, the police, the EMTs, the crane operators, the people who spent months at Ground Zero and who were exposed to toxins because of the building materials that all fell down when the buildings crumbled. And in fact, I was just learning about how even their families have been sickened, and notably it's by cancer, because when these firefighters and other people at Ground Zero would come home, if they didn't leave their clothes outside their home and they washed their clothes along with the clothes of their family members, now we have been seeing family members get sick because of the toxins contaminating the clothes and the skin of the family members. So the death toll and the sickness toll keeps expanding. So, okay, so that was the museum. The 9/11 Tribute Center is incredibly moving because not only are there descriptions and videos and artifacts and so on from 9/11, but then there are the stories of all of these families, and there are these docents and artifacts, and also information about what has been happening to help the victims, the families and other victims of 9/11. And so it's a very positive kind of uplifting sort of end to the museum tour, in a sense, by hearing about all these positive things that have been engendered from 9/11. The next day, I went to the 9/11 Memorial Museum, which also was incredibly moving. It has, it's cavernous. The museum is huge and dark, and you get the real feeling of what it was like to be there on 9/11. And the part that I liked best was this room where they are continually showing slides of pictures of the people who died in 9/11, and there are little stories about them that are told. So you really get to, that's personal also, you really get to feel who these people were, and so many of them were so young, and they had their whole lives ahead of them. And so that also was incredibly moving. And then the next day I went to a museum that is not as well known. It's called the Ground Zero Workshop Museum. And that is the private collection of a photographer who was asked by the firefighters to take pictures of the recovery efforts. And he has amazing pictures and artifacts and a tour, an audio tour that goes along with that. And it's a very intimate kind of space. So that too was very moving. So here I am in tears, each day at the museums. And by the way, if you have not gone to these museums, each of them, I really would encourage you to go. When I was on tours of these museums, it was mostly people who weren't from New York, who came from foreign countries. Some came from California and some other states, but for the most part, it was people from Europe or various other countries. And, I'd like to believe that's because all the people in New York already went to these tours and to these museums and so on. But I have a feeling that it's on the same scale of reasons for why there was no mention in the media of the terrorists on the anniversary of 9/11. People want to be in denial. And it hurts too much to be so aware of that. Now, I am a born and bred New Yorker, which is why after 9/11, I was motivated to dedicate the rest of my life to helping families cope with 9/11, including my new book. And so it changed my life. And at that point, even though I was born and bred in New York, I am currently living in California. So after being steeped in all of these memories and the meanings and the pain of 9/11, to then and be spending hours at Ground Zero, which is beautiful and meaningful, and also seeing the survivor tree, which is the only tree that survived 9/11 and survived all kinds of assaults to it. It should be dead, but it showed its strength and its resilience by continuing to bloom, and to bloom leaves and to be healthy. It's the picture of resilience. And so after all of this, all of these days of tears and being moved to tears and so on, then came the anniversary of 9/11. And then came the media coverage of it. Now, certainly, reading the names and seeing the people read the names and talk about their specific relatives who died, and, their husbands and cousins and uncles and all these people, and then when they tell their story, they're crying, and it's still so raw. I mean, you have to be moved by that, and I was again moved to tears. But what did the rest of the media show besides the reading of the names? Very little to nothing in regard to terrorism. You would not know that these people who died because of terrorists plotting to take over the West. Now, I'm sure the families and the people who died are honored, or feel, happy, or feel honored that there are still all these tears and all these museums and all of that, as there should be. But they would be honored even more if we learned a lesson from their deaths. They wouldn't have died in vain if we now learn the lesson that we should become more resilient, each of us, and we should pay more attention to how we can prevent future attacks. That would honor them all the more. And yet, no mention. There were a few odd media mentions, of here and there, but really, for the most part, no mention of the terrorists and of what this day was all about, besides honoring, or in addition to honoring, the victims. Now, this is one of the reasons why I feel so strongly about my book, because the children who were not there at 9/11, they only have these anniversaries to remember 9/11 by. And if it's going to be sanitized by not mentioning terrorists, it is not teaching the children that they need to build up their resilience, which is what I talk about in my book. That's, as well as teaching them who terrorists are, why they want to hurt us, in ways, of course, that are gentle, but the truth, which they are not getting from the media. So they were just getting confused. So I I feel so passionate about the need for our children to learn, because otherwise they're going to be caught unawares, kind of like we all were on 9/11. And I don't think that the victims or their families want that to happen again. So here's a picture of my book, the cover of my book. Again, Lions and Tigers and Terrorists, Oh My, How to Protect Your Child in a Time of Terror. You can get it where books are sold. I independent bookstores, brick and mortar bookstores, and it's Barnes and Noble, and so on, as well as online, and as well as on the website, www.terrorismforkids.com. Terrorism, the number 4, kids.com. You can also find out more about my views about terrorism. I analyze terrorists from the various attacks that there have been, and talk about all kinds of things to try to help families stay calm and carry on my website, which is terroristtherapist.com, and on Facebook. If you put in the Terrorist Therapist, you will get to my Terrorist Therapist Facebook page. And I just want to leave you with the words of one of the guides from the tours of the museum. He ended the tour by saying something that we all need to remember, which is, the price of liberty is eternal vigilance.